Do you think the Iran war is going to end in 2026? Expert prediction.
Okay, this is a good question, actually. A lot of people want to know.
Do not hype him up with saying it's a good question. I'm tired of guests telling you it's a good question. I ask good questions. That's what I do. That's my job.
Well, okay, I'm an academic, so I'm going to break it down a couple of different ways. It depends on your definition of war. On the one hand, the strategy, at least as much as there was one on the American government side, was a quick little war. The kind of wars that Americans tend to like, and that
Right.
when presidents are able to pull them off, tends to actually either boost their popularity or at least is remembered as not so bad. So this clearly is not that type of war. Instead, it's kind of right now, we're in the middle of May. It's kind of almost unsteady ceasefire with, a possibility of going into a hot war again. And, let's think about also the type of wars in the Middle East over the last, few years. They're wars that kind of sometimes end but then start up again.
Right.
Good example being, the Israeli government's, re-invasion of Lebanon, which has been going on the last,
Right.
few months. That was a temporary ceasefire, at least according to some people, and then they're back in. So, there's probably a couple different scenarios. One, which is pretty unlikely, if you want a scenario, is that the Iranian government and the United States enter into some type of grand bargain, the kind of thing that many people have hoped for a long time, which kind of settles some long-standing diplomatic and geopolitical questions. And, maybe politics in Iran get a bit of a space to develop outside of this pressure from the United States and Israel that's been going on for a long time. Not very likely. Not very likely. This kind
By
of
bargain, do you mean like lifting of sanctions?
listing of sanctions, reestablishment of some sort of diplomatic relationship. The United States hasn't had an ambassador to Iran since 1979. And on the other side, Iran, because of the incentives, the Iranian government kind of pulls back a bit on its kind of adventuring, I'll call that, in the region. That's probably not very likely, just because I think a lot more will have to happen for the United States to think that that's a good idea for them. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm talking about the American foreign policy establishment in the United States. The more likely scenario is, basically there's a kind of Cold War that, the United States government realizes that you can't overthrow the government. And they probably don't know how to extract themselves. Many of Iran's neighbors in the region were hoping that the United States would protect them. They haven't done that. So, but basically something that, not hot conflict, but maybe something else down the road again. And then it seems less likely today in May 2026, but we'll see that, there's another big air war because we've learned, the United States has learned the hard way, that the estimates of Iran's government collapsing or being unable to fight on this kind of symmetrical level were not accurate. And that, as much as we can blow up the country and blow up all of its, planes and ships, doesn't stop militaries from fighting in asymmetrical ways as long as you're in the region. So, we'll see.
A lot of people in the U.S. government are saying Iran's government is, it's divided. There's no leader. How true are those assessments? Is it really fractured? Have we actually done any sort of dent on their political infrastructure?
I mean, most countries that the United States has considered rogue or the enemy, whether it was the Soviet Union, in the Cold War, or the Chinese government, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, there was this whole way of doing analysis, which used to be called Kremlinology. Kremlinology meant that, we don't know a lot about the Soviet
Sounds
Union.
like an ice cream place.
Yeah.
Kremlinology.
Well, Kremlinology was a Cold War discipline. So, you kind of look at the names of all the political elite, and you're try to guess, who's on what side and where's it going. And, it was a lot of people, were basically trained in Kremlinology. It's a kind of joke, though, because often it involves imputing all kinds of analysis you're not really sure about. So the same thing goes on with Iran, that, who is this Ayatollah, and is he related to this guy, and what are the divisions in the government elite? And because if I know that, then I can predict what's going to happen next, right? And of course, it's always important to try to understand politics in a country. But you don't want to go overboard. And by overboard, it's the kind of rhetoric that we've heard that that there's a division, and this division means that the government's about to split and they can't run anything.
Right.
And of course, one could do the same thing to the United States, as actually occurs in those countries. If you read the newspapers in Iran, they're constantly talking about the Epstein files. They were very interested in the assassination of Charlie Kirk.
Did you see that ad they put out about the Epstein files, the Iranian government?
No.
I don't know about ads. I mean, there's been all kinds of online propaganda on all sides. I'm not sure the Iranian government did that. There was a couple of AI volunteers, or like eager volunteers, to put out, kind of propaganda on the Iranian side. I mean, the thing about wars, there's always going to be propaganda along with wars. So, but yeah, so I think, we don't want to overanalyze divisions in the government, because I think, U.S. has learned in the last 2 months, learned the hard way, that there's something about the political structure of the Iranian government where the kind of common technique of United States and Israeli government in other countries was, if you take off the head, then the body will collapse. Right? It's a common. I'm not making that rhetoric up. That's a rhetoric you hear from the analysts and the military experts in those countries, including the United States.
Did to Maduro, right? We just took him and basically installed somebody that's a U.S. puppet, essentially.
Well, it was the vice president. It was not, we didn't install. I mean, the person was already kind of sending signals to the United States that this might be okay. Of course, not, whether or not that's worked out for Venezuelans is a separate question. So in the Iranian case, I think people probably believe their own hype about how if you just take out the leader, because that's the guy's official term, Khamenei's official term, one of them, that everything else will crumble. It's all dependent on one person, And I think that was a projection. That wasn't really a good reading. Right. And there were many, many people who said that's not actually how it works in Iran. Like, the government's pretty well institutionalized. There are political divisions. There's politics in Iran, different factions tied to different parts of society. I think the mistake here is to project onto Iran like this kind of fantasy that there's a single government, it's all a bunch of the same type of people with beards, and then there's the society that is disconnected in all kinds of ways. State, society, and the disconnected. And we often talk about this, Iran, that way. Many Iranians talk about Iran that way. But in reality, it's not really that accurate. And that got in the way, I think, of us understanding that, if you kill, whatever, the top 2% of the political elite, what's going to happen next? The thing didn't crumble.
How does the Iranian government actually work? Like, if you could, I know it's a complicated system, but if you could break it down in like simple terms, because a lot of people are confused about the IRGC and how much of a role they play versus, the Ayatollah, the internal police. Like, what are the different main factions in Iran?
I mean, work to do what is the question. So you're talking about basically some of the security apparatus.
Just like operating the country. Like, who actually has power? Is power divided amongst equally in different branches of government like America, which it really isn't, but like, what are the main factions of power in Iran? Yeah,
okay. So there's it's more than a dual system, but at least we can start at least with the dual system. So there's like the executive administration part of the state, ministries, a presidency, and those ministries run, the electricity, the water, the welfare system, right? And then there's another side of the state, of the government, which is this kind of unelected set of bodies. And at the top of that, of both that coordinated, is the office of the supreme jurist, the so-called leader, right? And that person is supposed to be a jurist of the Islamic tradition. who was recently killed by Israeli United States. So his son was elected by a separate body. And then on also that side, you have the IRGC, which is a kind of military organization that was born out of the Iranian Revolution back in 1979. That in its raison d'etre is to defend the revolution and the state. And over the years, it's basically a second military. There's the Iranian military, which has been around for a very long time, since the 1920s. And then there's the IRGC, which is a kind of parallel military. And this parallel military, since the 1970 revolution, has become more and more important in parts of governance. And now, as you can see, there's basically at the top, there's a kind of security council that's running itself as a war council. And on the security council in Iran is representatives of the IRGC, generals, representatives of the executive branch, the president, and the Speaker of Parliament, who himself was in the IRGC. So that's the issue. Where are they divided, and therefore this is not going to work? It's actually kind of out of the way, politics and governance. I think your question is more about governance than politics. Governance has worked for a while. The downside of that is that as we basically call it securitization, as perception of threat from the outside has been more and more intensified, especially over the last 20 years in Iran. And then that has really narrowed the space for kind of domestic politics, and I mean protest movements, electoral politics, demands on the government. Everything is securitized, and when you're fighting a war, just like in the United States, every social demand is interpreted as a security threat, right? This is a threat to the homeland, right? I mean, I'm using the language of the United States, but that you hear that language in Persian when you're reading the Iranian newspaper. So, what in more peaceful times, and this would probably be the hope for some type of grand bargain, in more peaceful times, demands from below for social rights, for political rights, it would be harder to interpret and claim those as threats to the homeland. Whereas when you're fighting a war, it's very easy to dismiss those.
Right.
Call it a fifth column. You're traitors. I mean, we hear that language in the United States today. So that's also the downside of war, for long-term prospects of social and political rights in a country like Iran.
So you said there's two parallel militaries. So what does that mean? Because obviously in America, it's like you have one military, it's not like we have another militia. So
right. So it starts from the 79 revolution itself, where the revolutionary government inherited the kind of armed forces of the monarchy. These are just like the Persian Gulf states today. Iran of the 1970s spent a lot of its money, its oil money, on buying weapons and building up its military, and of course, mostly from the United States. So it had this huge military. It had armed forces. It had air force. It had infantry. It had a navy. And then there was a revolution. Many of the generals in this military, of course, were anti-revolutionary. They either were purged or they left. Some were executed. Some changed sides. And became kind of a revolutionary, with the Islamic Republic. So already by the beginning, there was a distrust of the inherited armed forces. So the IRGC was essentially a paramilitary, to the side military, that developed and absorbed a lot of these revolutionary dudes who wanted to save the revolution. And then we should remember that basically a year into the 79 revolution, Iraq invaded Iran, Saddam Hussein's Iraq. So that gave a kind of arena for the Revolutionary Guards to fight. And to fight, sometimes they fought alongside the inherited armed forces, but there was a struggle between them. Who's going to fight these battles? Who's going to get prestige from them? That was an 8-year war. So over that war, the Revolutionary Guards became more and more important in justifying their existence, getting resources. In the early 90s, a lot of these parallel parts of the government, and that was lots of places, not just the military, they were like, well, we have two systems, not one. So they weren't fully merged in all places, but they were attempted to be, kind of coordinated at the top. And by today, the old Iranian armed forces are kind of subsumed under the Revolutionary Guard command. So it's not like there's two chiefs of staff,
right,
or two sets of orders. So it's a subsumed to a certain extent. But nevertheless, the legacies of that inheritance are still with us. So it's not like the military does one thing and the IRGC does another thing anymore.
So it's basically to put both group of thoughts like at ease, right? Basically like saying, hey, we don't have to fight each other. We can work together in some way.
Well, every revolution has this problem. So the Soviet Union, the Chinese Revolution, they all have this problem where the revolutions tend to happen in states that are already pretty fully formed. They don't happen in collapsed societies. So, the Soviet Revolution occurred after a long buildup of the state by the Tsar, right? By Imperial Russia. We were industrializing. They had a military. They were fighting in World War I, and then the Bolsheviks took that over. So they had the same issue: we have to rely on the machinery of government to carry out the revolution. On the other hand, we don't trust it. So we have to build a parallel state. That happened in 1920s Russia, with all kinds of violence and politics as well, but also upward mobility for all kinds of Russians that went up through the revolutionary side of the state. It happened in China. Because in China, the People's Liberation Army fought like a civil war for years up until the revolution. But nevertheless, it kind of had to displace the inheritance of the Chinese Empire. And in the Iranian case, the revolution happened very quickly, much more quickly than many expected. So the monarchy, the Pahlavi monarchy, spent decades building up this big state, and the revolutionaries had to figure out what to do with it. So it's like a common problem for revolutions: is what do we do with what we inherit? We both have to claim that it's all going to be wiped away. We're promising the new order, but in reality, figuring out what to do with it is actually a pretty tricky problem. So this is how we get parallel states that then have these questions of what to do next. But it's not two systems of thought. You could say that. I think it would be more that it's questions of organizations. What do we do with these? What do we do with the organization? What do we do with the people in it? They know what they're doing on one hand. On the other hand, we don't trust them. So it's like the most classic problem of revolutions.
America and Israel were hoping, though, that there would be a revolution in Iran right after the Ayatollah was assassinated, that would spark people in the streets, thousands of people just taking over. Why do you think that did not happen?
I'm not going to say it's a good question, but it's a question.
I mean, we know Iran uses a lot of suppression, right?
Yeah. Well, we have to go back a little bit. Why was this a plausible claim?
Right.
From many people. We heard it on the news. We saw op-eds saying all you have to do is kind of flick the top of the Iranian government, and then this kind of popular revolution will occur. So, over the last 20 years, really, basically, there's been rising waves of basically street protests in Iran, and closing opportunities for kind of more institutional politics, meaning electoral politics or social movements to make more recognized demands on the state, and those demands be kind of bargained with to a certain extent. Still goes on in Iran, by the way. You just don't read about it, but the space has been closing, and they're not necessarily fully related, but it's not a coincidence that with the closure of kind of institutionalized politics, spaces for making demands has closed, then street politics has become more militant, and often more common, often in reaction to things that no one can predict. Price of gas goes up one day, there's no protests. Goes up a year later, huge wave of protests because they kind of concatenate in unpredictable ways. So that's already been going on, and that's generated all kinds of claims about what's going to happen next. Are these powerful enough to topple the government? And like in a lot of cases, other governments have gotten interested in this. So since probably 5 years ago, Iranians outside of the country have also, of course, been very vocal about what this means. They've been active in it, and this is where we get this kind of dangerous dance between Iranians inside the country, often getting involved in Iranians outside, organized, not just people walking around LA, but organized politics, and big powers that either want to be in alliance with them or use them. So my reading is that that on the one hand, there's been a powerful and growing, waves of protests inside of Iran. And on the other hand, there's been, kind of organized politics outside of Iran that that various countries are interested in, as well as Iranians are interested in. But the thing we have to remember about revolutions is revolutions don't happen simply because a lot of people go into the streets.
Right.
Okay, especially in states that have a capacity to repress protests. The protests that just happened in Iran, in between these two wars, the war of 2025 and the war of 2026, there was a big protest wave in January, late December, January, which, a lot of us predicted something was going to happen, but, caught the government by surprise. At first, they tried to ameliorate, protesters, and it got out of hand. There were all kinds of claims that there were foreign actions involved in the protests. It's hard to tell. And of course, as I just said, perceptions of threat justify all kinds of things that wouldn't be justified by others. So massive repression, massacres of protesters in the street in January 2026, and then kind of quiet. So, if that had been left on its own, it's very difficult to tell what would have happened next in a year, in 2 years.
Right.
But that's not what happened. Instead, what happened is that the United States and Israeli government cynically, and I'll use that word intentionally, cynically, because we know, because reporting has said this, said that this is a sign that the government's going to collapse if we just flick the top, right? But here's the thing that they either forgot or they knew and just didn't want to tell the rest of us, is that the other side of the coin is when a foreign invasion or a war on a country occurs, it causes a wave of defensive nationalism. Iran's not the only case here. Iranians are nationalists. They're as little or as much nationalists as many places.
Right.
Koreans, Vietnamese, Mexicans, whatever. They're all nationalists. Yeah. So when this invasion occurs, what do you expect to happen? The claim that this is going to foment another popular revolution, I think many people said that's very far-fetched. And actually, you're going to cause the opposite. You're going to destroy, for who knows how long, the space that had been building up, the perception of the government as weak, as not responsive. Wars change those types of dynamics. So, whether or not people believe that, who sold that as a story, we now, I think, realize that was a very dangerous and counterproductive manipulation of the groundswell of protests inside of Iran that was justified, that was repressed brutally, but now in many ways is actually an interregnum, meaning something in between two wars. And from the Iranian government's perspective, it was part of the war. It was a long war, and they called those protests something induced by the outside. Of course, that doesn't mean it's true, but that is something that it's not unexpected that a country or government under attack will say any protests are basically part of the enemy's plan.
Right. Well, I saw the Supreme Leader's one of his last addresses, and he said the U.S. and Israel are responsible for the massacres. That's pretty much what he said.
Sure. I mean, I don't look. This is we should be like critical thinkers here.
Right.
So because one government says something,
right, doesn't make it right, right,
or doesn't make it true,
right.
But we should try to understand what's the politics there. There's certainly an audience for that that set of that rhetoric, both domestically and also globally, right?
Speaking in a hypothetical world here, right? There's a lot of conspiracies going on in terms of why we really went into Iran. Israel's obviously a big proponent. There's a reason DJT gave us. What do you think the underlying reason is?
Who's the we in this sentence?
United States teaming up with Israel.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, as prior presidents have now come out and said, whether it was Biden or Obama, we're waiting to hear from Bush Jr., there was a constant demand from Israeli governments for the United States, to take military initiative against the Islamic Republic of Iran.
He's been doing it for 30 years, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been asking, right?
And maybe a separate set of waves. There's also been demands from some of the Persian Gulf states, the monarchies. Not all of them, and they themselves have schisms. But nevertheless, for a while they were also pretty much trying to get the United States to get more involved. Many advisors around those prior administrations said, if we do this, we're going to end up in a situation that kind of looks like today, like May 2026. So the idea this was all surprising is one of the most extremely unsurprising.
Right.
So the question is why now, not why. There's been a long demand that the United States has to be the actor that does this. And also that has two reasons why. One is that, the United States has, sometimes the military will be able to do things that Israeli military could not do. But the next is that it locks the United States in. Because the United States, we have these issues in the United States. When we start a war, it's really hard to stop it. Like, we have these problems, unless they're the tiny little wars that the United States likes. But, we haven't really won a war since, a big war. Tiny wars.
Yeah, when was the last time we won a big war? Civil War.
Again, the question is, what's the definition of a win? Yes, Civil War.
Civil War. We won it.
Did we win the 1991 Gulf War from the Iran, which is called the second Gulf War in the
Bush
region?
Senior,
But it's our first Gulf War. This is the third for the United States.
Sure.
It's the fourth for Iran. So did we win that? Well, we kind of got stuck because then we had to go back in 2003. So did we really win 1991? And let's put it another way. In 1991, the first Gulf War, which was basically to kick out the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
Right.
That had the UN Security Council voting in favor of military operations. It had NATO. It had basically the whole world. This was the Soviet Union hadn't fully collapsed yet. The Soviets, the Russians are basically behind. We're saying, okay with this. And Bush Senior said, and the Gulf states are going to pay for it. And they did. Saudis and these people paid for a lot of that war. In 2003, United Nations were basically against it. The Security Council was divided, and we had a, quote, coalition of the willing. That's a very funny term, but it's a term they used. That was in 2003. So in 2003, it was much more difficult to get the great powers and the middling powers, like Europe, on the United States side. 2026, there's 0 countries.
Nobody's
behind this. So just think about over the long arc of your lives, the inability of the United States as a world power to marshal the rest of the world behind its own wars. That's, I think, a more important sign than whether we won or not. Because winning for a great power is also how do you deal with a plan for the day after.
Right.
And that's something that, which is why, by the way, all of these advisors to Biden, Obama, I guarantee to the prior Bush was like, don't do this. Because it's not about winning this thing, the so-called body counts, when Secretary of War, Hegseth, says we've destroyed all these planes, that's what we call in the Vietnam War body count politics. We've killed this many Viet Cong. That means we're being successful, right? In the Vietnam War, every day on the news, the Defense Department used to read out the numbers of Viet Cong we killed compared to the number of Americans that died. And that number was extremely political. They were like, we have to get those numbers up. We have to kill more people because that's a sign of winning. Well, we didn't win.
Right.
So in the same way, when you hear Trump and Hegseth go on every day and talk about the number of things we've destroyed, it's the same logic. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows this in the Defense or War Department.
Do you see any chance of an off-ramp where Iran and America can mutually coexist in the grand scheme of things after this? Is there any shot that these two countries, like you said, have an ambassador finally, open channels up so that economically, we know the Strait of Hormuz has been under blockade by both countries now. So do you see any off-ramp there?
This is the unlikely but possible scenario is a kind of grand bargain, which diplomatically would take a long time to work out, which involve other powers.
Yeah.
Also being in the process, because why would the Iranian government trust the United States at all?
Right. They try to kill mediators.
There was multiple times where, when you negotiate with someone and then you kill them, which is kind of so. The Iranian government, whether you like it or not, strategically would want other powers involved. Well, to tell the United States that you have to have the Chinese sign off on a deal, something the United States, all of Washington doesn't want to do.
Right.
Forget about Trump. That's why the war is so disastrous, by the way, and we have to be honest about what's going on. It's so disastrous for the foreign policy establishment, you see. That's different than Americans broadly. But foreign policy establishment, the people whose kind of understanding of the United States' prestige is that, it's prestige in the world. So, I'm talking about people in the center. I'm talking about people on the so-called left, people whose understanding of America is that it has to have a great power role in the world, or all these other bad things are going to come afterwards. So for these individuals, and that includes people on the left, in the middle, and on the right, this is a disaster. Because why? Well, it means that basically, first of all, we'll never have to be able to have a war like this again because people can call our bluff. And second, that we're going to have to cede geopolitical power to other countries just to get out of this. So that's why I don't see it happening quickly, because these kind of lessons are very hard to learn. Yeah. And what happens is countries try everything else, and then they finally agree. So there's still a lot that the United States hasn't tried yet before the government accepts, and I don't think it's even accept. It'll probably be something a bit softer that let's extract a little bit. But I think we're kind of stuck. And then the question is, what's going to happen to domestic politics in the United States? How will people respond to this? How will the Democratic Party respond, which in my opinion has not done a very good job up until now. So it opens up a space for, speaking of opening up a space, it opens up a space for U.S. domestic politics. But we'll see over the next 3 years how that really proceeds.
Speaking of China, let me ask you another good question. Does China invade Taiwan next? Because why would they not invade Taiwan? It seems like this is the best time to do it, right? In the next few months or even the next couple of years. If there has been the best time ever to invade Taiwan, I would guess it's now. That's probably that's the worst best option. I mean, it depends what are the options on the Chinese government's menu. Remember, Chinese restaurants have a long menu. Right.
So I'm not so sure that invasion of Taiwan right now is a very good idea. It seems like the Chinese government's first route, it would be basically to kind of get a fait accompli, that the Taiwanese government just agrees to a one China policy. But really they've had all kinds of a backlash in Taiwan as a result of Chinese kind of statements of these things. So invading the country and possibly, by the way, getting bogged down in a similar situation. Okay, with or without U.S. help, I think many people there would be cautious. I think the Chinese are a bit more cautious on these. They have their own issues going on. Now, let me give you another example of another country that thought it was going to be super easy to deal with a neighbor. That was Russia, right? Even the U.S. intelligence apparatus, the CIA, the Defense Department, they all thought that if the Russians invade Ukraine, they take over Kiev, and that would be it. And they put in their own guys. CIA pulled their people out of Kiev a week before and said, good luck. And it didn't work, right? It didn't work. And now basically Europe is fighting Russia. I mean, Europe's funding the war. It's, it's helping Ukraine build the munitions to fight. And it's kind of asymmetric, but asymmetric with Europe backing it. Okay, so that didn't go the way the Russians planned. Now, Russia didn't collapse either. This whole goal of the bad guys collapsing in the U.S. It didn't happen either. So generally that's what happens in wars, by the way, is both sides have extreme visions of a queen click war. By the way, that's how World War I started. We're we're just going to invade Belgium, and then France will collapse, and then UK won't get involved. And the Germans were wrong. That's also what Hitler thought. Start one war, and it'll be over quickly. The United States won't get involved. And then we'll deal with the Soviet Union. So remember, wars are very, they generally don't work out the way that that was planned. And so think about invasion of Taiwan. I mean, I think there's many people in China who feel but it's better to try to continue this process of closing off other options, and then trying to just like Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong was quite brutal in many ways, but many people in Hong Kong seem to accept the fact that there's no going back, whether or not some of us agree or not. So it seems like that seemed to be a bit more of what the Chinese strategy might be.
They are more cautious, the Chinese government and, the institutions there. But it seems to me now they do have more leverage and power over America because, we know Iran gets a lot of its ammunition from China and Russia, and that there's been back channels where these countries have been talking. And Iran, I think, emerges as a new economic power. It already is because of the Strait of Hormuz. Do you see that changing? Do you see a renewed economic power within Iran because of the power of the Strait?
Well, let's go back to China. So China has relationships with many countries in the world, including the other side of the Persian Gulf.
Right.
Right. And China has relations with Pakistan because China and India don't get along. historically. So I think that we shouldn't overestimate Iran's geopolitical clout. Big mistake, where the Iranians often make that mistake. I think the Chinese would prefer a kind of settled situation that doesn't upset like the apple cart. Because as we know, although they've had, the Chinese government has done a, interesting job of lessening energy dependence inside of the country, and now they're trying to lessen food dependence inside of China. They're still, they're reliant on good relations and trade relations in many parts of the world. So I think that, because of the relationship of the Chinese economy to the world economy, it seems the interest is to not go through world wars. Okay, that seems like the general interest. Okay, so that's my sense of what like the Chinese want. Is they want this to resolve without the United States winning, obviously, which is not going to happen, but to resolve this so that that this, like the Hormuz Strait issue, is at least goes to a new normal. Okay, then back to the Iranian case. So Iran, on the one hand, the Iranian economy is in the middle of Asia. Some people forget that.
Yeah.
Some Iranians forget that they're in the middle of Asia as well. They're an Asian economy in the middle of Central Asia. So they have, kind of trade relations with Russia in the north and the Caucasus. Maybe actually less so with the west, but definitely with Iraq. And then obviously with the east, and then with the south through the Gulf, through trade with the Gulf. So the Strait of Hormuz, like let's say that they started taxing, every ship that went in and out by 5%. I mean, over time, that wouldn't really be a good idea. There's lots of other ways to get things around the world. There's a few things that might have to come out of the Persian Gulf, but most things eventually will shift. That's not a very good long-term strategy. And actually, that's not enough money to rebuild the Iranian economy. I mean, no one, I think, really seriously would say that. So, using it as a short-term leverage is probably, a good strategy on the Iranian government side. But saying that this is going to become a new normal, where this is our strait and we tax everything that comes through there, people will be like, okay, well, we're not going to go through there anymore eventually. And we don't have to. Like, you don't have to. So I would say that this is not like it's not a chokehold on the economy for the next 50 years. It's something that people took for granted. Although many, war games showed that it's right there. All they have to do, they don't even have to mine the strait. They don't have to blow up any ships. They just have to make it look like that's a threat, and that changes people's behavior.
The perception,
changes companies' behaviors. So even now with this, the very short-lived Operation Freedom, which Trump has now canceled, Operation Freedom, that was 24 hours. But even that, the United States has a hard time convincing ships to go through, saying we're going to protect you. Because how do you guarantee? You can't. Why would you? Yeah. You can't guarantee that. Yeah. And a ship's like, companies like, I don't want to lose that. So I think the Iranian economy is in bad shape, and but the question is, and it's a question of, let's see what happens, is that the Iranian government is saying, well, we can't go back to, there is no old normal. There's no status quo that we can go back to where there's not going to be another war. So what do we have to sacrifice? What do the Iranian people have to sacrifice, really, to get to a situation where it's going to be a different type of status quo? By the way, that's a great question. Nobody knows. So that's like where I think the politics of the next 6 months to a year, the domestic politics of the United States, will have an effect. Have an effect on that. But I have to ask you guys, why is there no anti-war movement among young people like right now compared to 2 years ago? There was lots of youth politics in the United States, but I don't see a lot. I teach at UCLA. I don't have to walk through an encampment to get to my office anymore because of the war on Iran.
Well, I think two things. One, probably because, Palestinians don't have the institutions that Iran has. Iran is like, a global country that has power, obviously not as compared to America, but Palestinians at the time, it seems like they were being, they are still being invaded by a country that just is, it's like a disproportionate response, So I think that's why a lot of young people aren't so much, passionate about when it comes to this war.
Well, I also think the perception of Iran is not as positive as Palestine. Like, I feel like people already believe that Iran isn't a great country as is. I mean, so it's like, okay, like, we're not making the best move here. We're actually screwing our own country over, but these people aren't good either.
But I don't. I think most of us are against the war. Like, there's nobody.
sure, yeah.
I've never met like a person my age be like, yeah, what
you're
we're
on
doing.
war.
Like, let's go America. We're gonna win this war. I've never met anybody. We're all against the war. But it's a good question. Like, why aren't we protesting in the streets? I think initially there were some small, protests. But you're right. It's like I haven't seen like millions of people or encampments in college campuses yet. You don't know. It might happen. It's
Well, I mean, I think 4 days after the war started, everybody. I mean, once the initial blitzkrieg, we can call it that, of killing off the head of state of a country, which is almost unprecedented in many ways.
Insane.
Killing the head of a state. There were, for 200 years, like great powers worked so that you weren't supposed to do that.
right.
We've gone back on a lot of those traditions, of war.
His entire family too, right, was attacked. Like his house,
Wasn't the whole cabinet
where he
under
lived.
wiped?
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Well, you remember the United States, we bombed Gaddafi's house in mid 1980s, supposedly killed like a child. So United States had. I'm not going to blame Israel for this. Like, the United States has had a policy, certainly in the post-war period, of targeted assassinations as political goals, right? But never doing it so brazenly. That's the difference. I think the brazenness of it is also in itself.
Bragging about it, yeah.
Yeah, it itself is probably counterproductive in the long run. Back to the question of but after 4 days into it, when the targeted assassination of the head of state and another political elite, and then taking on all these things, didn't produce this collapse. Whether or not really people thought it was going to happen or not, it certainly was sold that way. Then people already realized, there's a problem. So, and the other thing about it, I just want to note is this was, in 2003, when the United States went to war with Iraq, they talked about it for like 6 months. There was a long period of talking about this.
They tried to convince everybody.
Yeah, they wanted to build up public opinion and global opinion.
There's no such
So
effort,
there wasn't any of that this time. Like, nobody, we were negotiating with the country, and then they started moving troops over there, and everyone was like, maybe there's going to be a war, and then there was one. So often I think it takes longer for social movements to start, even with social media. It's hard to get one started. So I think if the war had gone differently, then there may have been a different type of response. Luckily, Iranian government didn't need campus protesters this time around.
So if I can't wrap my head around this, right? Hypothetically, the U.S. takes over the Strait, and we have full control over it. What happens then? Obviously, Iran's not going to be happy. I don't think other parts of the world are going to be happy. What actually happens after that?
It's not the end. So, I mean, if you wanted to occupy the Strait of Hormuz...
aren't we doing that right now with the naval blockade?
We're out in the Gulf of Oman.
Right.
So the United States Navy is out there a little bit further. That's how you get to the Indian Ocean. And there's Pakistan and then Indian coast. So that's where the U.S. Navy is, and it's trying to prevent ships from going in and out. Okay, but then in is the Strait, which is much more narrow. And I encourage everyone certainly the United States has been doing it, look at the map. It's very narrow. Other side is the UAE. And that's where, let's say you took over that strait. It's like the Strait of Gibraltar. Like it's probably a pretty good. Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf are pretty similar in that sense. So, if you go look on the Iranian side, there's lots of places around there where someone could still, pull out a RPG or pull out a missile battery. And threaten, and just shoot things over, right? So what the United States would have to do, which is why I think many military advisors would say that you can't resolve this, is that you then have to basically occupy the southern coast of Iran, because you have to push back, the ability of Iranian asymmetric forces to pop up. And shoot something, and of course that includes, by the way, not just ships, but U.S. bases, U.S. troops. And then just to finish the story. U.S. troops are based in southern Iran. Okay, that's a disaster, because we know what happens. We know what happens when U.S. troop boots on the ground end up having to defend a forward position to protect a bunch of assets backwards because behind it. That's when we get the kind of worst quagmire scenarios there. Now, maybe we're already in a naval quagmire. I don't know. The Navy talks a good game, but we're kind of stuck. So I don't know how you say that. Now, I mean, the question is like, big, great power navies protecting the right of trade is a very, has a lot of history. It's evoked a lot today. But it doesn't end wars. Like generally, the navies protecting trade don't end. They often can cause wars, or at least they can be part of wars. World War I being a famous example. Like the Germans put submarines, all around the Atlantic Ocean, and said any shipping to the UK, who were an active belligerent against, any shipping to the UK that's military will be perceived as aiding the UK, and we'll blow it up. And the United States, of course, was already shipping all kinds of things to the UK. Said we're just shipping civilian goods. There was for years, the Germans were firing on U.S. ships, and famously a couple of them sank, which was one of the reasons that the United States got into World War I. So these things don't end wars. I mean, wars end diplomatically, either by exhaustion on both sides, or by some type of more petered out broader arrangement with a bunch of great powers. So the question is like, who is going to have to get at the table? And it makes it very complicated. I assume the Gulf states want a say in whatever comes next. I assume that China and Russia want a say in what comes next. So you see what I mean by the fact that somebody sitting in Washington who 2 years ago they thought, oh, we're doing great. We're really, we're going to be great in the 21st century. Now it's like, uh-oh. Like, how do we get out of this?
Yeah.
There were reports. Go ahead.
So at the negotiation table, though, right? Obviously, they know what's going to come, right? My assumption is Trump's guys know, hey, this probably isn't the best move. There's still going to be a war that continues after. There's still going to be civil unrest. So this is my assumption, right? Is that they're basically offering an empty threat, scare Iran a little bit, realizing, hey, we're not going to get this, and then kind of going in further and further, trying to tighten the negotiation. Is that accurate, you think?
I don't think the United States is very good at current United States administration is very good at negotiating.
You don't think they were a great deal, Mike?
I think that they
don't get great deals.
Even
the best deals.
Well, I mean, I think I leave Trump aside. Like obviously, Trump has a way of in the beginning of the day, having policy one, and at the end of the day, it's policy two.
Yeah.
And these poor sons of bitches have to defend everything he says. Like they get whiplash every day. Fair enough. Of course, every government in the world knows this. Yeah. I mean, this is something that they have advisors who tell them how to deal with Trump. So I don't think
that's crazy. They have an advisor to advise just on Trump.
All the European states have people to tell them this is how.
This is our Trump guy.
So some of them say you have to go and kiss his ass, like the German, like the Germans these last few months, and some of them say no, you have to go tell him to f off, and then he'll respect you, which is like by So they have different ways to do it. So I think. You have diplomatic negotiations take a longer time. In fact, you could make the argument that the constant leaking, as much as it's not very democratic in the lower D sense, the constant leaking of diplomatic processes, the way that Trump thinks he can use, and the Iranians think they can use public opinion, global public opinion, elite public opinion, to shift the negotiations actually impedes the process because negotiations involve compromise. In the United States, let's just think about it. Let's say the United States government compromises with the Islamic Republic of Iran. I mean, how will that play in some parts of the United States? I'm not talking about Downey. I'm talking about like
Arkansas.
I'm talking about, elite segments of the political class. It's not going to go well. They're going to use that against them. I guarantee you there's going to be some part of the Democratic Party that says that Trump lost to our enemy and he's weak, and they're going to go hawkish on Iran. Because that's, by the way, what the Democrats did in the 1990s. And that's what Hillary Clinton did, actually, when she was running for president. So there's a hawkish part of the Democratic Party, which, by the way, was
the neocons, you mean, in the Democratic Party, pretty much. The war hawks.
I mean, they want the American power to be exercised whenever America wants it to be. I would say yes. And they think that the American military might, should be able to take unilateral action without being checked or having to be in concordance with other powers. whether it's Europe or obviously or China or any other country. So I would say there's a longer tradition of American foreign policy, which is, you can call it neocon, but it goes beyond that. There's nothing neo about it. I would say it's hawkishness. It's what they would say is a full spectrum dominance over a kind of military options. So most countries don't have that prerogative, and they have to actually deal with other countries in other ways. So I just think about like what Trump's done. Like I think it's already, well, you can see, we'll go read Fareed Zakaria. Like this guy, who's a centrist as you get. He's aghast, at what Trump's done. But he's aghast because why? Because it's shown that the foreign policy levers of the United States aren't working anymore, or might not work in the future, right? And that for them, it's like a symbol of decline, of power decline. The relationship between American power in the world and the average guy in Downey is a good question. They might be related, they might not. Would people be better off in the United States if America was a normal great power and not the great power? It's a good question that maybe people should ask in an electoral season. But I guarantee you that some portion of the Democratic Party, and this is because there's no anti-war movement. People are not making claims on the Democratic Party to stop the war. They're going to say, you know what? If we were in charge, we would have done it right.
Job would have been done faster. It would have been a 4 week.
We would have done it better, or just say you did it so wrong. It's a blunder.
These guys, I'm tired of these political games of like, well, these guys are doing it wrong, and I'm going to do it right. Like I just watched the gubernatorial debate last night, the mayoral debate, and it's like, I feel like we're living in a retarded simulation where it's like they will say the same things as each other, and then somebody wins, and it's literally the same thing the other party did, and it's like, yeah, sure, maybe the way they're doing something is different, but the results to us is exactly the same. That's what it feels like to me.
So gubernatorial like that.
Gubernatorial.
Or whatever.
I think you just coined the term.
Gubernatorial. It's a hard word to
or
say.
Or just goobered. I think it's like a guy goober. I feel your pain.
I feel like everybody does, right? Like the average person.
But I guess the question is like, okay, so what's the answer to being frustrated with like local or state or national politics? To understand like the political points in which organizations that have less power could put pressure on them. So politics is about understanding the other side at their weakest. I'm an intellectual. I'm an academic. So when you're doing social science or science, you should try to make an argument against someone's strongest point. Mm-hmm. But if you're debating someone, or if you're really doing politics, you should understand the weakest point.
Yeah.
Not a straw man for debate. I mean, there's good debates and bad debates. But when you're doing politics, that's like, old political strategy is you shouldn't attack someone at their strongest point. You should attack them at their weakest. So if people are frustrated with whatever LA, city politics or California state politics, of course, understand the politics. And so I don't think sometimes a lot of frustration is channeled into like an understanding of the political landscape, and then where would it be a pressure point to do that? A good activist, they often understand this intrinsically. But other people, the rest of us have to understand that by learning, by other people telling us this is the landscape. So you should get someone on and talk about that. Who are in this debate that you talked about? Who are they really talking to? Are they talking to you? I don't think you watch it. Good for you. I don't think a lot of people watch those debates. What's the voter turnout in the mayoral race?
In an off year too, yeah.
Yeah, the primaries are more important. Just like the primaries are quick because it's a blue state. So primaries matter. So how do you get turnout in primaries? There's a whole machine behind that. That's why Karen Bass is probably win. By the way, she's got a machine. She's the inheritor. She's inherited the.
She has so much money.
There's so much money. Well, did you know? In terms of raising money in this, Spencer Pratt's raised more money than she has.
But in like a specific quarter, there's no way he has more cash on hand than she does.
No, obviously because she has machines behind her, right?
But I don't think. But I even say machine. I actually refer to the old way of doing politics in the United States, which is machines are ways that political organizations can pull out people to vote.
Like grassroots.
Oh, I see.
Well, you can call it what you want, but machines used to be a pejorative. Machine meant that in this neighborhood, I had a ward boss. Like I'm from Chicago, so that's how Chicago politics used to work. And that ward boss meaning he was a political operative who worked for the Democratic Party. And his job was to whip up votes in all of the working class households around him. So he'd go around, he'd know everybody's names, he'd know their problems.
Yeah.
He couldn't force anybody to vote.
Yeah.
But he would go and say, you voting? We love to vote. Here's a kielbasa, just to keep you happy.
It's like
so that's
mafia, yeah.
Well, no, but that's
That's what.
well, think about it. In like 1890, you know what the voter turnout percentage was
What was it?
in 1890 in congressional elections in the United States? It was like 85%.
Really?
Yeah, it peaked in the machine period. I mean, when we reformed the
85%.
political process in the United States, voter turnout went down because people weren't necessarily tied to voting in these ways. So in the classic, so LA had a machine, different neighborhoods, delivered votes for different candidates. And so Bass, who's been in California politics for such a long time, I think that she knows the machine and is able to use these processes quite well. That they're certainly not what they used to be. And so really it's about winning the primaries. And then in the general, it's a blue state, so you'll probably win in the mayor's race. Maybe not governor, but mayor's race.
Right.
So I don't know, but that's by understanding the political landscape. If you wanted to do something about it, or someone else wanted something, that's the first step towards dealing with this frustration.
Boots on the
Because
ground.
it's fun to be frustrated, but
Yeah.
if you want to go beyond that, that's
Go
what
do
Gotta have some
something,
actions,
yeah.
yeah.
100%.
I do think domestically we need a revolution to really fix the country. Yeah, like we can't if you want to change the status quo, we can't have the same old two-party system because I think we've exhausted that. We've seen the positives and the negatives have definitely outweighed the positives in my opinion, or in terms of the perception of a lot of the younger people. We're tired of seeing only two choices, and it's usually the lesser of the two evils. And like if we really want to stop these ongoing wars and forever wars, there has to be a different change in our culture. Like you said, we can't just be okay with whatever the government does. Like we have to be more active and be more informed. Because I think a lot of politicians never blame the voters, obviously, because they're trying to get their votes. But I do think us being so ignorant and not being as informed about even our local communities definitely gives the politicians leverage to manipulate and do things that none of us have the time to even read about or know about.
Well, just speaking on behalf of Gen Z, I mean, we talked to a lot of people our age, and everybody I talk to kind of has the same consensus that what I just said, right? The same stuff happens over and over. It's like, we want this to happen, but at the end of the day, there's really only going to be two candidates that go at it, and we don't agree with either of them. But it's like, do you want to waste your vote and go towards a guy that you actually want, or put it towards something that's like the better of two evils? Mm-hmm. And that's where it's like, okay, that's what's exhausting about it. And it's like, we've also set up, like, the U.S. has set up a system to go against that system. It's so like integrated already, right? So it's like for us to go against that system just seems like such a far stretch, which I don't know if it is a far stretch, to be honest, if we're all feeling like this, but.
Okay, there's a couple of different things going on here. One is two-party system in the United States, historically, going back to whatever, Bull Moose Party, like every time there's been a third-party movement in the United States, which does happen basically, once every 20, 30 years, it fails. The most recent, I don't think there is no most recent example.
Ross Perot, I guess.
Well, on the left, there was the Green Party,
right,
and the Green Party, which also existed for a while, didn't really make inroads in a lot of places. I voted for the Green Party when I was a young guy.
We had Jill Stein on 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. But notice that they have to fight against the two-party structure. And then they have something like the Democratic Socialists of America, which had a strategy of, in races where there's a kind of progressive candidate who's running for the Democrats, we'll put our organization behind it. That happened in LA City Council races a couple of years ago. But in races where there's no progressive Democrat, we'll run a candidate, get him on the ballot who's like a DSA-sponsored candidate, and try to affect the primary. That strategy has actually probably worked better. Zoran Mamdani is a good example of that strategy, right? Which, he kind of came out of nowhere, but he'd already been involved in New York politics. So I think, on the right, the strategy has been much different. The strategy was we infiltrate the GOP, the Republican Party, and we take it over. And they did. Okay, so that's a very different strategy. That's how they dealt with the problem of two-party politics. You better believe there were conservatives in the 1980s who were sick of the GOP and said it was a bunch of WASPs. They're not conservative enough, whatever conservative means to these guys. They're not reactionary enough would be the right word. And so we have to have like a long game of taking over the party. And they did. And then, of course, Trump also destroyed the old party establishment. So where that he just primaried, he's a 35% approval rating. He just primaried like 11 dudes in Indiana like last week who didn't go the way of voting for his gerrymander. So inside of the party, that guy's got power. Support for the war is very high inside of Trump supporters. Like if you support Trump, you support whatever he does because that's the kind of way that the possible. So so in that sense, think about it this way: you made a bunch of claims about two-party system. No, the structure is getting in the way. It didn't get in the way. We're not living in your dad's world where we were all frustrated with the two-party system. I don't think that system exists. Like it looks on the ballot that way, but on the right, it's not the same system anymore. Who's going to take over the Republicans after Trump's gone? I don't know what's going to happen. The guy lives forever, but they don't know what to do over there. So that's an open question. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on the right to kind of take over the party apparatus. And all of these.
You're saying the right is now more fractured than ever, pretty much, because there isn't like a consensus like it was.
There's no successor.
Right.
Many dictatorships have this problem of succession.
Right.
Okay. Well,
Donald Trump Jr.
GOP has a problem with succession. Okay. Just like the show. Okay? Right. So then the question is what's going on the other side, and I think that there's not enough politics on the other side. Like there's no war, some political war, for or at least there's not enough of it. For a battle over the Democrats. But I don't think we're in a system of stasis right now. I think there's lots of opportunities to do politics. So I understand the frustration, but hence knowing the political landscape. I mean, back to my original point about like, if you're frustrated, either you should try to learn a bit about the politics and see what motivates people. That's the other thing I was going to say. Like you were saying that, okay, well, people aren't motivated. They should learn more. Politics never happens because people learn more. Politics happens because people feel like their interests are tied to something else, and they get motivated to just get involved. I think we shouldn't like insult America saying they're dumb. I don't think smart people people get what they read the newspaper. They get better at politics. Absolutely not. I think that people get pulled or into movements through their networks, through their social networks, the people they know, the people they trust, or people who reframe what's going on to them in motivating ways. Certainly that's what happened on the right. So, the question is, like, look at Mamdani. I mean, people weeping in front of this guy. It was basically like a Aziz Ansari type character. They're weeping in front of this guy, thinking it's
Aziz, that's a stretch.
he's thinking that he's like, the second deliverance of politics.
Right.
He's a great politician.
You're right. He made people care. He made people feel like if they voted for him, things would actually get better in their own household. So you have
to get that. That doesn't solve everything, but that has to be part of the process. The question is first of all, is how do you get there? That alone is very difficult, but we can see it happening in our lives. So we should see that is possible, and it's actually probably becoming more possible as these structures are breaking down. But then the question is what happens next, and that's where you need a politics and a strategy to deal with the other machinery of government that is not just about parties and elections, but the operations of government. I'm not being conspiratorial. I'm saying that how do you deal with public transit? How do you deal with housing? Right? These are questions that people should have like policy agendas on. Mamdani did. Like he had all these nerdy things that they did. And
he's doing a lot of them. Yeah.
Now he's doing politics. Is he accomplishing everything? No. Is he? But he's done enough to where he can say, actually, you voted for me. I'm getting X, Y, Z done. That's the way he talks. He's very on message. He's like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders' speech is always like the same four things.
Same thing.
I might not like it because I've heard it before, but it works. It works. So I think we should look at in politics. You got to see what works. Why do you think everybody started talking like Trump? Because
Trump.
They thought that he had the secret sauce.
Using his accent, right?
Even look at Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu in the 1990s talked like a technocrat.
Yeah,
a very middle of the road. like he could talk to kind of the WASP establishment of the United States. He basically talked like a kind of upper elite or elite United States. You know, he had the U.S.
That's
accent.
a great point. Yeah.
Now he talks like he's like a preacher. You know, like a pastor with like the end times are coming. Okay, he's not an idiot. He's obviously very smart. He actually Trumpified, you know, his political identity. Yeah. He's not the only one. I mean, look what's going on. So, of course, emulating your opponents or emulating people who are successful is a common thing in politics. But probably, you know, many people said we should be happening on the other side as well.
But it does seem like both political party establishments are very much tied to Israel. You know, if you look at the map of U.S. Congress, Democrats, Republicans, sure, Republicans are definitely more pro-Israel now, but the establishment takes so much money from the pro-Israel lobby. And going back to Iran, I don't think Israel wants a stable Iran. Like, I don't think Israel's ever going to rest if Iran starts to have any sort of success. Like, it's in their interest for the war to just keep going and going and going. And I don't see how America can stop Israel, because it seems like they have been getting their way somehow. I don't know how they do it, but whatever happens, it always benefits them, at least in the last 18 months alone.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things going on there again. Let's unpack it. So one is the relationship of like Israeli foreign policy to like U.S. domestic politics, which of course everybody's got an opinion on. I've been doing Middle East politics for 30 years. Everybody's have an opinion on it. Well, it's not set in stone. They're like domestic congressional races where prior to now, like some politician in Wyoming's position in Israel, which never mattered. They nevertheless have to say something because maybe that they would get
litmus test.
Maybe a litmus test. It's not really about okay. Well, that's not the case anymore, obviously, and that's not because the Israel lobby hasn't stopped spending money. It's because the domestic politics of Iran, of the United States, have changed.
Right.
So a lot of this thing, in my opinion, is not about the power of Israel as a government over the United States government. It's about about how many foreign policy issues only matter in the U.S. when they are domesticated, when people care, when they map onto already pre-existing American political cleavages. By the way, look at UCLA in October 2023. I bike to work almost every day. I bike to work, so I bike through Westwood. That's where UCLA is. Okay, and I started counting keffiyehs. Keffiyehs are kind of the scarves that are a symbol of solidarity with Palestine and have been since like the late 1960s. And every day I started, counting them. And for the first couple, once it was clear that Israel was going to do this massive invasion and occupation of Gaza, I started counting it. And basically for a couple of months, it was only the Arab students. It was basically Arab students. The Arab students that were already kind of aware of the Palestinian issue. And, although, Columbia is a separate issue, but in the UCLA campus, it really didn't become domesticized or domesticated till the spring.
Like May.
January, February. And then you started seeing white kids wearing keffiyehs.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that it's just they only did it because it was cool. But I am saying that that's actually the power of the student movement that got people who basically were totally depoliticized, couldn't find the place on the map, to talk like they were somehow deeply embedded in Middle East foreign affairs. I mean, by the way, I'm not saying there's any other way to do it. Yeah. When some white surfer guy is talking to me about Zionism, then I know that the movement has succeeded. Like, this guy's watch out for all those Zionists. I'm like, what? Okay, but I'm not critiquing that. I'm saying that's the only way it could have done it. You have to domesticize.
It's the Mamdani way. You have to make people care. Yeah,
but it has to map onto the cleavages, right? So that's also, in my opinion, why the Iran war hasn't registered. Right. But never will fully come over. I mean, we can't demand Americans care about Iranians. What we can say is the things going on over there matter here because of X, Y, Z in your life. That's how you have to do politics. So I think that this kind of goes back to your Israeli lobby question. Like I think that it's overblown.
Really?
That the lobby somehow, the way that the foreign policy works is when it maps onto American domestic policy, then people are like, I agree with that, right? So, and that's obviously not the case anymore. That's not the case anymore. So maybe it didn't last as long as one thought, whatever that is. And also, we have to understand what was at the root of it. It wasn't the all-controlling power of a lobby, but the way in which different, actors try to influence U.S. foreign and domestic policy by mapping onto American domestic cleavages, which themselves have gone through changes, over the last, 20, 30 years. So that's my read on the so-called Israeli lobby.
But don't you
I
think,
even put up the scare quotes for the viewers at home.
But they still have like a lot of influence in Middle East impacting the politics there, right? I mean,
Okay, so just have a question. Okay, so we have to think about foreign policy and domestic policy. It's
Right.
not the same,
right.
but related. So the domestic policy in Israel, domestic politics, was very much over the years became more and more right wing, and more in favor of this kind of adventurous, expansionist policy.
Great
Because
original project, sure.
It was supposed to, secure the homeland, right? We have to go there, otherwise they'll come here. I'm just using general language because we've heard it.
No, that's
elsewhere.
what Benjamin Netanyahu says, pretty much. That's what he says.
But it's
Yeah.
also it's an old, and that worked domestically to basically win elections over and over and over again. It brought everybody to that side. So that's important, and that's still there. So I think the Israeli foreign policy won't change till a lot of the domestic politics
right.
goes through a shift, and that's going to take a while, and that won't be very fun looking.
I mean, even the left wing there has become more right wing.
There's no left
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah. It's all just who's more Israeli nationalist. If that's the right word.
The left has lost. The left, which was a particular type of left, basically lost electorally,
Right.
and was squeezed out, as they will admit. So that's its own question, and it's related to, but the ability of Israel's government to continually sweep over and over and go deeper into the rest of the Middle East, and have its version of full spectrum dominance, that it can bomb a country whenever it wants. It doesn't respect sovereignty. That is something that the United States has greenlighted.
Yeah.
And the Biden administration basically greenlighted even more so after October 7th.
Right.
Right. And so the question is, after what's going on now, will that still be there? And I mean, that's a political question. I'm not so sure it will be.
That's why, like, I was talking about two parties. Like, it seemed like Biden and Trump both had the same policy when it came to Israel: appease. I mean, they didn't seem like did anything to stand up to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and be like, no, there's international laws. You can't do that. Biden might have done that privately, but, that's where I feel like the two-party consensus when it comes to foreign policy might still be there, because Trump is playing the same Bush Jr. playbook. I mean, at least Bush tried to convince people, like you said, right? Trump was just like, fuck it, I'll just bomb.
I mean, that's why I'm telling you that it's perceived as a tragedy in foreign policy establishment circles in Washington, not because people are dying, but because this is basically removed part of the toolkit of American power. Okay, so that's why they're hand wringing, But whether or not that matters for other things is a question we were talking about. Does it matter for people's lives? So I think it also does. By the way, just because Iran wins this doesn't mean that it's going to be great for Iran. But we're living through something which probably people will talk about for a long time, which is that the U.S. used the gun in its holster, and it didn't work. And these things have effects downstream that one can't predict. But I think I always hesitate here. Remember, war has propaganda on all sides. So I'm not going to go and celebrate like the genius of Iranian government, or like it's going to become a great power. I mean, Iranians love to be complimented. But I don't. Look what happened to Vietnam after they won against the United States. Like the country was in terrible shape for a long time, and then ended up, basically selling us shoes. So
American media is so extreme. I've been hearing so many like analysts. I don't know if you know this guy, Professor Jiang. He's been like,
the guy with the whiteboard.
Yeah. He's been saying Iran is going to be the greatest power, one of the greatest powers. It's basically like they are going to essentially run the world in a way. Like they're like the next big thing, basically. So you're right. I feel like there's a lot of like projection and exaggeration. It seems like it's either this or the complete opposite of that. You're saying it's not as black and white as that.
Most wars don't end with the complete opposite. That's the problem with starting a war. Is one once you start it, it's very hard to end it. Second is the winners of wars, generally not the people who either started or the other side. I mean, the outcomes are hard to predict. So it's most likely that, we'll get some type of, well, you asked your first question, like, what's going to come out of it? Probably something in the middle. That's why I was like, if I was a gambler, something in the middle. And will Iran be able to maximize its leverage? Actually, it should do the opposite. Like, now it has leverage, as clearly we can see. It should actually not try to overstretch and overreach. And they should give Trump an out and let Trump, bleed on, for his own domestic audience. And there are some Iranian analysts who think that's actually the right way to go. But, remember, Iran has politics. It's not one guy at the top, reading the Quran for advice. It's people doing politics inside that country against each other, Kremlinology in its own way. So they're fighting each other for how do we get out of this with the best for my side. So some people are very hard line, you want to call them that. They want to squeeze as much as possible. They want to symbolically make sure everybody knows that Iran has defeated the United States. That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. That's all, but also for domestic politics. Like, you have to remember, there's also domestic audiences in Iran which eat that up. And people might not, want to hear that, but domestic politics in Iran still exists with audiences who their whole lives have thought about the United States as like a threat, behind every conspiracy, and now the government has won or is beating them. Like, it fulfills many weird fantasies out there, including on many people in the United States too. But in reality, it's a bad idea. Like, you should. We have maximum leverage. You should give the other side out, and try to structure things so that you get the best of the situation. So I worry that the Iranian government, for domestic reasons, will overstretch. Because what happens in wars? When you think you're winning, you think, now we'll get everything we want. It's a classic thing that happens in wars. And then at some point something happens that you didn't predict, and it swings the other way. And this has happened 3 times in the last 2 weeks, supposedly.
So many things have. I don't even know how to track everything. It seems like one side says one thing, one side says the other. Right now, I think America's waiting back to hear back from Iran on the latest proposal that they submitted. I mean, I don't know if Iran is saying they're not considering it. I don't know what the truth is.
People watch this in 2 years and not know what we're talking about. But
yeah,
I mean, it does seem like that.
There's been so many proposals, so many back and forths. I don't know what to believe.
That's okay. I mean, the way the negotiations the way the diplomatic negotiations are supposed to happen is just supposed to actually, you have to be in a room a long enough time.
Right.
So the idea of the diplomacy by letter, it's still going to take a very long time. For one, because the United States is not in a position to accept compromises on these issues that they probably will have to. Probably have to down the line. And the other side is that, it's still somehow there's still actually active lobbying of the United States military by hawks to say, no, we can still win this thing. I mean, this is why
Lindsey Graham, he's still out there saying, "Let's go."
He has his own reasons for his own. But I think there are people who say, actually, we're still going to win. And so that also has to eventually be exhausted. I mean, it won't be exhausted in the public sphere, but I think tactically and strategically, I think inside the or White House, whatever there is, 3-4 people who are doing this, they'll have to think that, well, no, we should probably take a win. That's where the domestic U.S. thing matters, because you can keep the Fifth Fleet over there in perpetuity, right? You can change the sailors' laundry once in a while, give them Salisbury steak or whatever they're eating over there on the U.S. Gerald Ford, whatever they're eating. Okay, so it's actually not as they say many times in Washington, it's not a question of military power. It's a question of the strategy of what's gonna come out of this. So that's where the domestic politics in the U.S. matters. I have no idea over the next. Remember, the guy's still president for 3 years. Let's not forget this, right? So we got a lot ahead of us.
If he survives,
make sure you guys keep this podcast going. Well, Trump's a man of history. Let's not forget that. I think no one's going to let him out that easy. We're going to have a heart attack at the Resolute desk.
You never know.
It'd be too easy.
He's been eating McDonald's for 80 years, Diet Coke, Pepsis. Yeah. I mean, that guy. It's a miracle he's still alive. I'm shocked. 80 years old with that kind of lifestyle. Like, that's crazy.
Bro, you didn't hear the Joe Rogan podcast? He said that he was in the best shape that any president's
Rogan
ever
said
been
that?
in. No, Trump
Oh,
told
Trump.
Joe Rogan this, that there was like they have a health test going
Well,
into presidency.
JFK in his
He's
40s today.
I had the best numbers in terms of how long I could jog for.
Yeah.
He's manifesting. I think he's just manifesting, and he's
Projecting.
It's working.
It's a different meaning of manifest destiny, but that's what he is. He manifests it, and people think that he can will things into existence, and I think, look, that's what you guys are in sales, like.
That's what his line was, right? Like,
make
I'm
it-
Midas. Like,
you can
I
make it.
turn shit into gold.
Yeah. So obviously that has hit its limit in one way, but think about it domestically. Like the win-win, at least the way the position is that he has to claim that he's won, and so if that's why it would be better for like a compromise where. Because you don't know what's going to happen in a year or 2 years. Like, you can't trust the United States. So this question is, what do they want to do? One way to do it would be like something that's not even a deal, but something where the U.S. promises a bunch of things. The problem is the Iranians not going to trust it. So that's why I think the problem is these are things that you can't get out of because you can will. The manifest destiny doesn't get you out of the Strait of Hormuz, and I think they know that now in the White House. If you leave, you're going to get pulled back in. If you go double down, you're going to have to pull back. You're going to have to back out. So they literally are. They're stuck. And I think this is why. This is why they're having a heart attack in the circles of elite opinion that really care about this. That really, really care about it.
If I'm Iran, why would I not get a nuclear weapon now, though? Because it seems like it would be the best way to, restrain somebody from invading your country again. I have a nuclear weapon. Don't attack me.
The do we, don't we have a nuclear weapon is what Iranian foreign policy involved for 20 years. And
Right.
it didn't stop a war.
Right.
Having one nuclear weapon still might not stop a war. I think that is, the taboo of nuclear weapons is a very important phrase that's in part of 20th century politics. I don't think it matters anymore. It's very likely, given the kind of clearly what's happened, loosening of this taboo. There's probably lots of countries will get nuclear weapons in the 21st century, but it probably won't matter as much, I think, in terms of deterrence. So I actually think that that's not as important anymore. Symbolically, it's important.
Really?
Yeah, the Iranian government says we want to be able to do nuclear science, have enrichment. It's become a symbolic thing for them. They have to. They basically has to be on the table. And the United States and Europeans, to be frank, are the nuclear taboo is very important in their lizard brain. We can't have it, right? Also, the Israelis want this kind of asymmetry in the region. So I think that now that we know that you can't topple the government, at least this time around, and that and it's a big country, you can't invade it, obviously, that the nuclear weapon is not going to deter anything. I think the deterrence clearly came from somewhere else, right? Came from somewhere else. I mean, yeah. So I say that I think you're reading too much, meaning too many op-eds. The nuclear weapon.
I've been
as
watching a lot of podcasts. That's what I've been doing.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Sorry, yeah, you're not reading. You're not reading.
I don't read.
Listening to me.
I'm a 25-year-old.
Yeah. So I think it's not as important as it was made out to be in the 20th century, where the nuclear weapon was the new deterrent.
Right.
It changed geopolitics of the 20th century to some extent.
So it's just become a symbol now of some nations' right to something.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. My last question to you is: you've been teaching at UCLA for a while now. Have you noticed students have been more involved and cared more over the years, or has the level of enthusiasm and passion declined over the years? It's a broad question to ask.
Well,
I know, but,
the question is to care about what. So
politics and in general about social movements and actual tangible things that you can pursue and change in a culture and society.
I mean, UCLA students it's a big school, so you got the broad swath of I think of the American population in the school. So in that sense, the ups and downs of UCLA are the ups and downs of the U.S. So 2020, 2021, all these people were basically militants, black nationalists walking around, and then it kind of went away. I mean, there was a backlash and policing each other's speech and all this stuff. Basically, UCLA students got part of the backlash against that. They were. The keffiyeh hipster, returned when I was in college. There were also keffiyeh hipsters. They returned. So that's one thing. The other is there's always been students involved in their communities who are much more active than you would expect, given that they grinded to get to UCLA. First kid in their house to go to college. There's a lot of these first generation college students at UCLA, which is one of the, in that sense, UCLA is still accomplishing the mission of public education that it was supposed to. Some of these people are very involved, but you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it because they're doing the work. So I don't know. I respect that a lot. I think that, so I don't know. What does it mean to see an engaged student body? They don't have to care about what I care about. That would be I always worry about the hubris of the academic and the intellectual, podcasts included, is why don't other people care about what I care about? I find that to be incredibly narrow-minded question. It's what are other people interested in? And why are they interested in that? And what's the history of that? And what's the reason? But that's a much more important question, which podcasts sometimes get at.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on.
I do have one other question.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Prior to the podcast, you said you didn't believe in Gen Z. And my assumption is you don't believe in generational divides.
Okay, thank you.
Why?
Thank you for asking that question. That's a great question.
Thanks.
Yeah. So the question is, what does the concept of a generation explain? That's the question social scientists would ask. Okay. So let's say that a bunch of people who are young are doing something. Okay, how do we explain that? So it turns out that the concept of a generation is not a very good one for explaining those things, and I'll tell you why. Because there's three possible reasons why that might be occurring. Sometimes they often overlap, so disentangling them is difficult. One, and they're called age effect, cohort effect, period effect. This is what the demographers call it. So age effect is that at that age in anyone's life course, they're going to act a little bit differently. So it turns out that most people who protest are young, but that also included 30 years ago, 60 years ago. Okay? So young people protesting is not a Gen Z thing. It's because people hit their 16 to 25, and they tend to be more active in kind of street politics. Okay, then there's the period effect, that there's something happening in that period which is actually affecting people across ages. So it's actually across generations. So like a recession, or sometimes a war, right? There's a big exogenous shocks on the outside that can affect a whole period, meaning it's the time period that matters, not the fact that a bunch of young people exist. And then there's the cohort effect. That's closer to what you mean by generations, where, but it doesn't have to do with being young. It's that something happened in that cohort, that period, only to the people in a particular age, where their entire lives they'll be affected by that. So people who fight in wars. So wars are important because the young people tend to fight in wars, and for the rest of their lives, there's something a little bit different about them, even when they're old. Right? That didn't happen to other people living in that time. So when someone says this is a Gen Z thing, my question is it because they're just young, and that's always the case with young people? So it's not a Gen Z thing. Is it because there's something going on to everybody at that time, but people like to personalize it? Or is it because something's happened to them, good or bad, and they're carrying it with them? Even when they're old, they'll be saying, oh yeah, well, when I was young, it was like this, which you hear. All right, so that's why I don't use the word generation to explain things.
Okay, I want to push back on the period effect. So you said a recession can affect, everybody, right, throughout their age, which obviously agree. But don't you think there's severity to recession?
This is where these are basically analytical types.
Okay.
Where in reality, they overlap. They can overlap in different degrees. So to disentangle them is like a very difficult thing to do analytically. This is what people are very sophisticated in this in scholarly work on these questions. So I am not saying that the concept doesn't cover things. The problem is it doesn't explain it because we don't know to what degree each of these things matters.
Okay.
So you're totally right that in the real world, processes overlap and they'll overlap to various degrees. However, we can't automatically assume that it's the case. That would be the danger of making these big claims that Gen Z is like this, especially if it becomes a global term. So like people talk about, let's go back to Iran. Like there's many pundits who say that Gen Z in Iran is why things are different today. I'm like, people in Iran, but we had a revolution among young people 40 years ago.
Right.
Those people are in their 60s now. So you're saying that young people in Iran are sick of the system? That was the case 40 years ago. It was the case 80 years ago. That there were younger people involved in political protests. So why is it that this particular generation? Oh, it's because they have a different ideology? So does everybody in Iran have a different ideology today? It's not that they're young. That is the cause of the change in their culture. It's because everybody's been living through a process over there. So these are extremely lazy claims. And because, you know, a lot of people like to hear that because it projects change. It has a theory of change in it, albeit unsubstantiated. It also hand waves away the hard work of understanding what's actually going on in Iran. Because the two ways that we tend to get Iran sold to us in the United States are Iranians that just like us, or Iranians that just want to kill us. And those are extremes. In reality, other countries are not just like us and are probably also not the opposite of us, whoever us is, by the way. So I think these are basically ways of listicling Iran for Americans. There's the Gen Z out there. Of course, this happens to the Gen Z in Nepal, the Gen Z in Thailand, right? This is lazy analysis. For mobilizing people, great. I mean, again, on the activist side, you want to call something sliced bread, the sliced bread generation, go ahead and call it that. If that gets people to do things, I understand that from an activist perspective. But when I put on my analysis hat, then I think those are lazy, knee-jerk terms that actually are examples of American imperialism because they just go over and then people use them outside of the country. And the cohorts are different. The demography is different. So
so you think it's a lot more complicated than what we're making it out to seem?
I don't like to say things are more complicated. Okay. I don't think that's a good way to go. That doesn't answer anything.
Or it's more simple?
No, I think it's just like it's the wrong question to ask.
Okay.
Doesn't mean things are more complicated. That's also
Stop asking bad questions.
That's a lazy move. That's the bad question. To say it's more complicated actually means that you haven't thought enough about it to explain it to someone else. That's a bad move.
I understand that.
So what you're saying is we got to change the name of the podcast from Gen Z Human Speaks. Just Chromosome Speaks.
I am interested in one other thing. So in terms of this generational question, okay, it does feel like just looking at Gen X, right? Well, I guess there's two questions or 2 points I have. I want to talk about more like Gen Z generation. It seems like they say that our generation is softer, right? Like our parents say our generation is softer, Gen Z is softer. But what's interesting to me is it's like across the board, right? Like across the states, you hear this, like kids are living with their parents until they're 28 years old. Gen X, that didn't happen, right? 18, 19, out the door. Obviously, there's people that do take off when they're 24, 25. But why is there this, I asked my parents and I'm like, why is there this resemblance across the board? It was never a conversation that they had with their friends like, oh, my parents do this and my parents do this, so we want to do a different way. There was never a conversation of that. It just kind of happened.
Okay, well, let's make this fast.
Yeah.
So there's 2 questions. One is like the concept of softness, which I think is again, I should be pushed back upon. First of all, what does soft mean? So it means living with your parents. First of all, in some parts of the world, like 60% of the country lives with their parents. Like in Slovakia, where when the Soviet Union fell and socialism fell, like anybody who was living in a house just got it. So then the next generation, everybody lived with their parents because no one got a lot of people didn't get new houses. So is Slovakia soft? Because in like 1995, everybody lived with their parents. In the Middle East, you live with your parents till you get married.
Yeah.
Are they soft? That's like patriarchy. That's like the patriarchal system. You shouldn't leave the house. You'll be policed outside your house by your dad or by your uncle or by your in-laws unless you get married, and then you move out. And you're still supposed to stay close to the family. That's patriarchal kind of kinship politics. Is that soft? So one is like this. I mean, again, this is Americanization of stuff that should be understood as historical, meaning that it changes over time. So people living more with their parents today, that's probably because of housing costs. Like, housing costs have gone up compared to people's incomes. Incomes have gone up, but housing costs have gone more up among Americans. So, like, you know, that's why people aren't, you know, moving out as much. On the broader thing of like, softness as a broader concept, I think that's where we're getting more into like, and that might be again a pretty constant thing. Is like, I think if you just go back and look, like in prior periods of American history, you have like a idea that prior to this it was better or different, better in a nostalgic sense. You know,
I've heard that.
you know this. You ever seen this graph where like they ask people across the entire life course, whatever age they are, what was the best decade for music and movies? And it's always when they were basically 20.
In the 20s, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how old they are today.
Yeah.
For them,
It's always the same.
by the way,
now.
this is what we call an age effect. By the way, okay? So,
Yeah.
so it's not that music in the 1990s was best. I can tell you right now, it was not. But it's that people who grew up to that. But when their identities are being formed, when they basically both socialized into culture and individualized away from their parents. This is stuff they identified with. It gave their life meaning, right? And that stays with them their whole lives. So I think some of this is this softy stuff is like basically like people were socialized in a particular time and they're kinging out their life and they're rejecting the changes in the culture that are alien to them and they're trying to blame it, you know? And that's about them. When I hear that shit, I think it's more about them and what's going on in their mind and their fear of change.
I agree with that.
And ability to accept change.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, you're going to get old. Like, shit's going to change.
Right.
Like, you know, if things didn't change, I'd be thinking something's wrong.
Something's weird.
Like, we were all complaining about the world.
Yeah.
Well, good news, it'll change.
Right.
We'll see what happens next.
I hope there's better change out there, though. I hope it gets better.
I
Just
have
a
hope.
little bit better.
I
Yeah.
have hope. That's the purpose of hope.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming
you.
on. Appreciate
Thank you.
Where can people find your work?
Don't. I've also grown old enough to know that like being online all the time and I luckily have a job where I don't have to brand myself.
Yeah.
And I know many academics who are different than that. I learned. I was all up in that for years. The payoff is very low. It's ephemeral. These things don't last very long time, to the fact that whatever, you got in the news once, you got not bad out. And I like to do work that I'm interested in the questions I'm interested in. So like I do research on things that I don't know the answer to. Rather than I know the answer to something and I want to prove it right by cherry picking evidence and then writing it up. You know, at some point you're like, well, that gets old too, unless it's something like weird. You got some weird drive going on. We have to always be right. I'd rather learn something once in a while. So that's where I'm at in my career, in my life, like in the conversations I like to have. I like to ask questions about things I don't know the answer to, and learn from that, and be open to the fact that I can be wrong. I think that's like a super important thing that maybe a lot of people never get that far in their lives. Not like I'm some kind of enlightened dude, but I'm just saying that like I learned the hard way. Like it's better to be open-minded. And if you hear something that like makes you go, oh, it can't be right. It challenges my whole core of my being. Then you should say, what's going on in my being where just a piece of information is causing a physiological outcome, right?
Yeah.
You got to think about that. So anyway, that's where I'm at. Ask me in 5 years though.
I respect that.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it.